My name is Claire Watson. I'm 35 years old, and after spending 15 years meticulously building perfect credit through disciplined financial management and never missing a single payment on anything, I received a bank alert about monthly mortgage payments on a $750,000 loan that I had never applied for, leading to the shocking discovery that my own sister Danielle had stolen my identity to purchase a mansion in an exclusive neighborhood while I was completely unaware that my financial reputation was being used to fund her Instagram influencer lifestyle. What she didn't know was that her desperate attempt to upgrade her image through identity theft was about to be exposed at her own housewarming party, where I would arrive with a fraud investigator as my +1 to serve her with criminal charges in front of all the social media followers she was trying so hard to impress. The bank alert that would unravel my sister's elaborate financial fraud arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing quarterly investment reports at my downtown office, where I worked as a senior financial analyst, helping clients optimize their portfolios and plan for long-term financial security. The automated text message from First National Bank seemed routine at first. Reminder: your mortgage payment of $4,247 is due in 3 days. This has to be a mistake, I thought as I stared at my phone, since I had been renting the same modest apartment for 6 years while saving for a house down payment that would allow me to purchase property within my careful budget rather than overextending myself with payments I couldn't comfortably afford. I had never applied for a mortgage, never looked at houses in the $750,000 price range that would require such massive monthly payments, and certainly never committed to debt that would consume over half of my monthly income before taxes. My approach to financial planning was conservative and methodical, prioritizing emergency savings and retirement contributions before considering major purchases like real estate. There must be some kind of identity mix-up, I said to myself, as I called the bank's customer service line to report what I assumed was a simple case of mistaken identity that could be resolved quickly through verification of my personal information and credit history. Ms. Watson, I'm looking at your mortgage account right now, the customer service representative said after I explained the erroneous payment reminder. You have a $750,000 home loan that was approved 3 months ago for a property on Maple Ridge Drive. The account shows your social security number, employment information, and credit history. The confirmation that there was indeed a mortgage in my name, backed by my personal financial information, was both shocking and terrifying as I began to understand that someone had used my identity to commit fraud on a scale I had never imagined possible. I need to speak with your fraud department immediately, I said with growing panic about the implications of having my name attached to $750,000 in debt that I had never authorized or agreed to assume. The fraud investigation that followed revealed the sophisticated nature of the identity theft and the extent to which my personal financial information had been compromised to create a convincing loan application that had fooled experienced mortgage underwriters and credit verification systems. Ms. Watson, we've reviewed your mortgage application and supporting documentation, the fraud investigator explained during our emergency meeting. Someone used your social security number, employment records, bank statements, and credit history to apply for this loan, and they provided convincing proof of income that matched your actual salary and work history. The thoroughness of the fraud was both impressive and horrifying, since it meant that whoever had stolen my identity had access to detailed personal and financial information that would have required significant planning and investigation to obtain and use effectively. Do you have any idea who might have had access to your personal documents or financial information? The investigator asked, as we began the process of determining how my identity had been compromised and used to secure such a large loan. As I thought about who could have obtained the comprehensive financial information necessary to impersonate me successfully, a terrible possibility began to emerge that I didn't want to acknowledge but couldn't ignore. My own family members were the only people who had ever had access to my personal documents and detailed knowledge of my financial situation. Have you ever realized that the most devastating betrayal of your life might have been committed by someone you trusted completely? That's exactly what I was beginning to suspect as I considered who could have stolen my identity with such thoroughness and precision. "I need to see the property that was purchased with this fraudulent mortgage," I told the investigator, dreading the discovery I was about to make, but needing to understand the full scope of what had been done with my stolen financial identity. The address on Maple Ridge Drive led to an exclusive neighborhood where I had never been able to afford to look at houses, featuring mansions with manicured lawns, circular driveways, and luxury cars that represented the kind of lifestyle I had always admired but never pursued because it was far beyond my financial reach. The house purchased with my stolen identity was a stunning contemporary mansion with floor-to-ceiling windows, a 3-car garage, and landscaping that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread about luxury living and architectural excellence. "This is the property that was purchased using your identity," the investigator confirmed as we sat in his car outside the house that represented $750,000 in debt that was legally my responsibility, despite my complete ignorance of its existence. But what I saw next would transform my suspicion into devastating certainty about who had stolen my identity and destroyed my financial security. My sister Danielle's distinctive pink Tesla was parked in the circular driveway, confirming that she was living in the mansion that had been purchased with my credit and my legal liability for massive debt payments. The realization that my own sister had stolen my identity to purchase a luxury home she could never afford on her own was so shocking and heartbreaking that I couldn't immediately process the magnitude of her betrayal and the extent to which she had risked my financial future for her personal lifestyle upgrade. The family dynamics that had enabled Danielle's identity theft had been developing for years through a pattern of financial irresponsibility on her part and enabling behavior from our parents, Thomas and Carol, who consistently rescued her from the consequences of poor financial decisions while expecting me to be self-sufficient and responsible without any family support or assistance. Danielle had always been the family member who lived beyond her means, constantly acquiring expensive clothes, electronics, and lifestyle accessories that her income as a social media influencer could never realistically support. Her approach to money was impulsive and image-focused, prioritizing immediate gratification and social status over long-term financial stability or responsible budgeting. "I need this designer purse for my content creation," Danielle would say when justifying purchases that cost more than most people's monthly rent. "My followers expect me to showcase luxury items, and building my brand requires investment in my image and lifestyle presentation." The rationalization of excessive spending as business investment was both financially absurd and personally revealing about Danielle's fundamental misunderstanding of sustainable business models and the relationship between income and expenses in any successful enterprise. "Danielle's credit cards are maxed out again," our mother Carol would call me periodically to share updates about my sister's financial crises. "She's behind on her car payments and facing eviction from her apartment. We're worried about her financial future and wondering if you might have any advice about debt management." The pattern was consistent and predictable. Danielle would overspend on lifestyle items and experiences, accumulate debt that exceeded her income, face financial crisis when bills became due, and turn to family members for rescue, rather than addressing the underlying spending behaviors that had created her problems. "I've offered to help Danielle create a budget and understand basic financial planning," I would reply whenever family members suggested I should provide assistance. "But she's not interested in changing her spending habits or living within her means. She just wants someone to solve her financial problems without requiring her to modify her lifestyle." That my attempts to provide practical financial education had been consistently rejected in favor of family bailouts that addressed Danielle's immediate crises without requiring her to develop the discipline and planning skills necessary for long-term financial stability. "Claire is so good with money," Thomas would say whenever discussing family financial situations. "She's naturally responsible and has always been able to figure things out on her own. Danielle needs more help and guidance because she's not as naturally gifted with financial planning." The characterization of my financial responsibility as natural talent, rather than recognizing it as the result of years of discipline, sacrifice, and careful decision-making, was both dismissive of my efforts and enabling of Danielle's continued irresponsibility. "Your sister just thinks differently about money," Carol would explain when I questioned why Danielle was consistently rescued from financial consequences while I was expected to handle my own challenges independently. "She's creative and focused on building her brand, not on boring details like budgets and savings accounts." The romantic characterization of financial irresponsibility as creativity, while dismissing careful planning as boring, was typical of how my family had always reframed Danielle's destructive behaviors as personality quirks, rather than addressing them as serious problems that required intervention and accountability. But while I was building excellent credit through years of on-time payments and responsible financial management, Danielle was destroying her creditworthiness through a series of defaults, late payments, and financial decisions that made her increasingly unable to qualify for loans or credit that would support her desired lifestyle. "I can't get approved for a car loan because of some problems with my credit report," Danielle had mentioned during a recent family gathering, presenting her credit destruction as mysterious difficulties rather than acknowledging the pattern of financial irresponsibility that had created her problems. "Maybe it's time to consider living within your means and rebuilding your credit through responsible financial behavior," I had suggested, offering the same advice I would give to any client facing similar difficulties. "Claire, not everyone can be a boring financial robot like you," Danielle had replied with obvious resentment about my suggestions for responsible money management. "Some of us have dreams and ambitions that require taking risks and investing in our futures. Have you ever been criticized for financial responsibility by someone who was secretly planning to steal your identity because their own financial choices had eliminated their access to credit?" That's exactly what I had experienced during months when Danielle was apparently gathering the personal information she would need to impersonate me successfully. The identity theft had required access to my social security number, employment details, bank account information, and credit history, all of which would have been available to a family member who had been trusted with personal documents during years of family gatherings, shared vacations, and the kind of intimate family relationships that involve exchanging financial information for legitimate purposes. "Danielle has been asking a lot of questions about your job and your income lately," I remembered Carol mentioning several months earlier. "She's thinking about changing careers and wants to understand how financial analysis works as a profession." The questions about my employment and income that had seemed like casual career curiosity were apparently part of Danielle's research for creating fraudulent loan applications that would use my financial qualifications to secure credit she could never obtain on her own merit. But the mortgage was just the beginning of what I would discover was a comprehensive identity theft scheme that had been ongoing for months, while I remained completely unaware that my credit and financial reputation were being used to fund Danielle's transformation from struggling influencer to luxury lifestyle content creator. The woman who had spent 15 years building perfect credit was about to learn that her own sister had been systematically destroying that credit through fraudulent purchases that would threaten my financial future and potentially result in bankruptcy, foreclosure, and criminal charges that could follow me for decades. The full scope of Danielle's identity theft was revealed during my follow-up meeting with the fraud investigator, when we discovered that the $750,000 mortgage was only the largest component of a comprehensive financial fraud scheme that had been systematically draining my creditworthiness for months, while I remained completely unaware of the debt being accumulated in my name. "Ms. Watson, we've expanded our investigation based on your mortgage fraud case, and I'm afraid the news is much worse than we initially realized," the investigator said, as he spread out account statements and credit reports that documented the extent of my financial victimization. "In addition to the mortgage, we've identified 6 credit cards that were opened in your name over the past 4 months," he continued, as he showed me documentation of credit lines I had never applied for or authorized. "The total outstanding balances on these cards exceed $150,000. The revelation that my sister had opened multiple credit cards using my identity and had maxed them out purchasing luxury items and experiences was both shocking and financially devastating. Since I was legally responsible for debt I had never incurred or benefited from in any way. There are also 2 luxury car leases in your name, the investigator added as he reviewed additional fraudulent accounts. A Tesla Model S and a Mercedes G-Wagon, with combined monthly payments of $2,800. The car leases represented not just additional monthly obligations, but also proof that Danielle had been living an elaborate fantasy lifestyle, funded entirely by my stolen credit, while I continued living modestly and saving money for financial goals that were now threatened by debt I had never agreed to assume. Finally, the investigator said as he reached the most devastating aspect of my financial victimization, there's a $200,000 personal loan that was used to furnish and decorate the house, plus additional credit lines for jewelry, electronics, and what appear to be vacation expenses. The total financial exposure from Danielle's identity theft exceeded $900,000 in debt that was legally mine to repay, representing more than 15 times my annual salary and enough financial obligation to destroy my credit, force me into bankruptcy, and eliminate any possibility of achieving the financial security I had spent years working to build. Ms. Watson, I need you to understand that regardless of how these accounts were opened, you are currently legally responsible for all of this debt, the investigator explained with professional sympathy for my situation. Identity theft victims can challenge fraudulent accounts, but the process is complex and time-consuming, and there's no guarantee that you'll be able to escape liability for all of these obligations. The legal reality that I was financially responsible for my sister's fraud, even though I had been the victim of her crimes, was both unfair and terrifying, as I contemplated the possibility of spending decades paying for luxury items and experiences I had never enjoyed while struggling to repair credit damage I had never caused. What happens to the person who committed this fraud? I asked, already knowing the answer, but needing to understand the consequences that Danielle would face for destroying my financial future. Identity theft is a federal crime that carries serious penalties including prison time, substantial fines, and restitution requirements, the investigator replied. If we can prove who committed these crimes, they'll face criminal prosecution and civil liability for the financial damage they caused. Have you ever been forced to choose between protecting your own financial future and protecting a family member from criminal prosecution for crimes they committed against you? That's exactly what I was facing, as I realized that pursuing justice for Danielle's identity theft would result in her arrest and imprisonment. I need to think about how to proceed with this investigation, I said, feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of the decision I was facing about whether to pursue criminal charges against my own sister. Ms. Watson, I understand this is a difficult situation, but you need to know that financial institutions are also conducting their own investigations, the investigator warned. Whether or not you choose to pursue criminal charges, the evidence of fraud is clear, and there will be consequences for whoever committed these crimes. The warning that my decision wouldn't determine whether Danielle faced consequences, but only whether I would participate in seeking justice for crimes committed against me, was both clarifying and empowering, as I began to understand that protecting her would not actually protect her from the legal system that was already investigating her fraud. But before making any decisions about criminal charges or fraud investigations, I needed to confront Danielle directly about what she had done to my financial future and understand her motivations for betraying someone who had always tried to help her succeed through legitimate means rather than criminal activities. The opportunity for confrontation came sooner than I had expected, when I received an Instagram notification about Danielle's latest post, an invitation to a housewarming party at her new dream home, featuring photos of the mansion she had purchased with my stolen identity and credit. Come celebrate my new chapter in this beautiful home that represents everything I've worked so hard to achieve. Danielle's post announced with obvious pride about lifestyle accomplishments that were actually the result of financial crimes committed against her own sister. The housewarming party would provide the perfect opportunity to confront Danielle about her identity theft, while surrounded by the evidence of her fraud and the social media followers she was trying to impress with stolen luxury and fraudulent success. "I'll be attending your housewarming party," I commented on her Instagram post. "And I'm bringing a friend who's very interested in learning how you were able to afford such an amazing house on an influencer's income." The comment was both truthful and strategic, since my friend would be the fraud investigator who was building the criminal case against Danielle. And his interest in her financial arrangements was indeed very professional and thorough. The woman who had discovered that her own sister had stolen her identity to fund a fantasy lifestyle was about to attend a celebration of that lifestyle while armed with evidence that would transform Danielle's moment of triumph into her moment of reckoning with the criminal justice system. The confrontation at Danielle's housewarming party would expose not only her identity theft, but also the family dynamics that had enabled her to view my financial reputation as her personal resource for funding lifestyle upgrades she could never achieve through her own efforts or honest means. The evening of Danielle's housewarming party arrived with perfect timing for the confrontation I had been planning, as her celebration of fraudulent success would provide the ideal setting to expose her identity theft in front of the social media audience she was desperately trying to impress with luxury she had stolen from my financial reputation. "Are you ready for this?" asked Detective Martinez, the fraud investigator who had agreed to accompany me to the party as part of his official investigation into Danielle's crimes. Identity theft confrontations can be emotionally intense, especially when they involve family members. "I'm ready," I replied with determination that had been building since discovering the extent of my sister's betrayal. She needs to face consequences for what she's done, and her party guests need to understand that her lifestyle is funded by financial crimes, not legitimate success. The mansion that Danielle had purchased with my stolen credit was even more impressive in person than it had appeared in her social media posts, with professional lighting that highlighted architectural features and luxury furnishings that represented hundreds of thousands of dollars in fraudulent purchases charged to credit cards opened in my name. "Welcome to my dream home." Danielle greeted guests at the front door, wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent and jewelry that sparkled under the crystal chandelier in her stolen foyer. "I'm so excited to share this amazing milestone with everyone who has supported my journey." The characterization of financial fraud as a journey and identity theft as a milestone was both morally bankrupt and legally incriminating, since she was essentially confessing to crimes while celebrating their successful execution in front of dozens of witnesses. "Claire, I'm so surprised to see you here," Danielle said when she noticed me among her party guests, her expression shifting from celebration to anxiety as she recognized that my presence represented a threat to the fraudulent narrative she had been building about her sudden financial success. "I wouldn't miss your housewarming party," I replied with calm confidence about the confrontation that was about to unfold. "Especially since I'm so interested in learning how you were able to afford such an incredible home." "Oh, influencer income has been really good lately," Danielle said with obvious nervousness about questions regarding her financial situation. "I've been working with some amazing brands and building my audience." The vague explanation about influencer income, while surrounded by luxury that exceeded the earnings of most full-time professionals, was both implausible and desperate, revealing her awareness that her lifestyle couldn't be justified through legitimate means. "Danielle, I'd like you to meet my friend Detective Martinez," I said, as I introduced the fraud investigator who had been documenting her crimes. "He's very interested in understanding how successful influencers manage their finances and afford such expensive properties." The introduction of a law enforcement officer as my guest immediately changed the atmosphere of Danielle's celebration, as she began to understand that my presence wasn't social, but investigative, and that her housewarming party was about to become something very different from the triumphant milestone she had planned. "Detective Martinez, what kind of detective work do you do?" Danielle asked, with forced casualness that barely concealed her growing panic about the implications of having a fraud investigator at her party. "I specialize in financial crimes, particularly identity theft and mortgage fraud," Detective Martinez replied with professional courtesy that was both polite and ominous. "Your sister has been helping me understand some very interesting financial arrangements that we've been investigating." Have you ever watched someone realize that their moment of triumph was actually their moment of exposure, and that the celebration they had planned was about to become their public reckoning? That's exactly what I was witnessing, as Danielle began to understand that her fraudulent lifestyle was about to be revealed to everyone she had been trying to impress. "Claire, can I speak with you privately?" Danielle asked with desperation that indicated she was finally understanding the magnitude of the situation she had created through her identity theft and the consequences that were about to unfold at her own party. "Actually, Danielle, I think this conversation should include Detective Martinez and all of your party guests," I replied with satisfaction about the public nature of the confrontation I had planned. "After all, they're here to celebrate your success, so they should understand how that success was achieved." The insistence on a public conversation rather than private damage control was both strategic and appropriate, since Danielle's fraudulent lifestyle had been performed publicly through social media, and her accountability should be equally public and transparent. "Everyone, if I could have your attention," I announced to the party guests who were enjoying catered food and premium beverages purchased with my stolen credit. "I have some important information to share about how Danielle was able to afford this incredible house and lifestyle." The party guests gathered in the living room that had been furnished with stolen money, expecting to hear an inspiring success story about social media entrepreneurship and financial achievement through personal branding and content creation. Danielle was able to purchase this $750,000 mansion because she stole my identity and used my credit to obtain a fraudulent mortgage, I announced to the shocked party guests. She also opened 6 credit cards in my name and accumulated over $150,000 in debt for luxury items and experiences. The revelation of identity theft and financial fraud transformed the celebration into a crime scene, as party guests realized they were witnessing the exposure of serious criminal activity rather than celebrating legitimate business success. In addition to the mortgage fraud, Danielle used my stolen identity to lease luxury cars, obtain personal loans, and fund the lifestyle you see here tonight, I continued as Detective Martinez began documenting the party and the fraudulent assets on display. Every luxury item in this house was purchased with credit that was obtained through identity theft. The comprehensive explanation of Danielle's crimes was both educationally valuable for party guests and legally significant for the criminal case that was being built against her, since her party was essentially a showcase of evidence that could be used in court proceedings. "Danielle Watson, you're under arrest for identity theft, mortgage fraud, and multiple counts of credit fraud," Detective Martinez announced as he placed handcuffs on my sister while her party guests watched in stunned silence. The arrest at her own housewarming party was both dramatically appropriate and legally necessary, since Danielle had been caught in the act of celebrating crimes she had committed while surrounded by evidence of her fraudulent lifestyle. The immediate aftermath of Danielle's arrest at her own housewarming party created chaos that extended far beyond the embarrassment of being handcuffed in front of her social media followers, as the financial and legal consequences of her identity theft began to cascade through every aspect of her fabricated lifestyle and our family relationships. "I can't believe this is happening," sobbed our mother Carol, as she watched Detective Martinez explain Danielle's charges to the shocked party guests, who were quickly leaving the mansion that had been revealed as the centerpiece of an elaborate fraud scheme. "Surely this is all a misunderstanding that can be worked out within the family." The characterization of criminal identity theft as a misunderstanding that could be resolved through family discussion rather than legal prosecution revealed our parents' continued inability to understand the severity of Danielle's crimes and their consequences for both victims and perpetrators. "Claire, you have to drop these charges," our father Thomas pleaded as he realized that his daughter's arrest was real and that family loyalty wouldn't protect her from the criminal justice system. "Danielle made some mistakes, but destroying her life won't solve anyone's problems." The expectation that I should drop charges, as if identity theft was a personal dispute rather than a federal crime, demonstrated Thomas's fundamental misunderstanding of how the legal system handles financial fraud and victim rights in criminal prosecutions. "Dad, I didn't press charges," I explained with accuracy about the legal situation. The bank's fraud investigation led to criminal charges because identity theft is a serious crime, whether the victim is a family member or a stranger. The clarification that Danielle's prosecution wasn't dependent on my personal decision, but was the result of evidence that had been discovered by financial institutions and law enforcement was both legally accurate and emotionally important for family members who thought I was personally responsible for her arrest. "But you could ask them to stop the prosecution," Carol insisted with desperate hope that family influence could override the criminal justice system. "You're the victim, so you must have some control over whether they pursue this case." "Mom, criminal prosecution doesn't stop because victims ask for mercy," I replied with patience for their lack of understanding about how financial crimes are handled by the legal system. Danielle committed federal offenses that carry mandatory penalties regardless of family relationships or personal forgiveness. But while our parents struggled to understand the legal realities of identity theft prosecution, Danielle's social media world was collapsing as news of her arrest spread through her follower base and the influencer community that had been impressed by her sudden lifestyle upgrade. "Danielle Watson arrested for identity theft." Read the headlines on influencer gossip sites that quickly picked up the story of her dramatic arrest at her own housewarming party. Instagram star's luxury lifestyle funded by financial fraud against her own sister. The social media coverage of her arrest was both comprehensive and damaging, as her fraudulent success story was transformed into a cautionary tale about the consequences of financial crimes and the difference between legitimate achievement and criminal deception. "I'm so sorry, I had no idea her lifestyle was funded by fraud," posted her former collaboration partners as they quickly distanced themselves from association with criminal activity. "We would never work with influencers who engage in identity theft or financial crimes." The rapid abandonment by brands and fellow influencers who had been impressed by her apparent success was both predictable and devastating for someone whose entire career depended on social media credibility and brand partnerships that required trust and authenticity. Have you ever watched someone's carefully constructed public image collapse in real time when their fraud was exposed to the audience they had been trying to impress? That's exactly what was happening as Danielle's follower count plummeted and her content was revealed as documentation of criminal activity rather than legitimate lifestyle achievement. "We need to start foreclosure proceedings immediately," the bank representative informed me during our post-arrest meeting about the fraudulent mortgage. "The property was purchased through identity theft, and the payments are in default due to the criminal investigation." The foreclosure of Danielle's mansion was both legally necessary and symbolically appropriate, since the house represented the centerpiece of her fraudulent lifestyle and could not be maintained through legitimate income or honest financial arrangements. "What happens to all the furniture and luxury items that were purchased with stolen credit?" I asked, curious about the fate of hundreds of thousands of dollars in fraudulent purchases that had been used to create Danielle's impressive lifestyle presentation. "Those items will be seized as evidence and eventually liquidated to recover funds for the financial institutions that were defrauded," the representative explained. "Your sister will lose everything that was purchased through identity theft, and the proceeds will be applied toward the outstanding debt balances." The comprehensive asset seizure that would strip away every element of Danielle's stolen lifestyle was both appropriate justice and practical debt recovery, ensuring that the evidence of her crimes would be used to compensate the financial institutions she had defrauded. "Ms. Watson, I need to inform you that your parents may also face charges related to this case," Detective Martinez called, to warn me about expanding legal implications for family members who had been aware of Danielle's sudden lifestyle changes. "We've discovered evidence that they knew about the house purchase and helped conceal the source of funding." The revelation that Thomas and Carol might face criminal charges as accessories to identity theft was both shocking and logical, since their knowledge of Danielle's financial situation should have made them suspicious about her ability to afford such dramatic lifestyle improvements. "They've been covering for Danielle's financial problems for years," I explained to the detective. But I don't think they understood that she was committing identity theft to fund her lifestyle upgrade. Ignorance of the specific crime doesn't excuse participation in concealing fraudulent activity. Detective Martinez replied with professional explanation of how accessory charges work in financial fraud cases. If they helped her maintain the deception about her income sources, they could face legal consequences. The expansion of criminal liability to include our parents created additional family pressure for me to somehow intervene in the legal process, despite my complete lack of control over prosecution decisions that were being made by federal investigators and district attorneys. "Claire, you have to help us!" Carol called in panic about potential criminal charges. "We didn't know Danielle was stealing your identity, but we helped her prepare for the mortgage application because we thought she had finally gotten her finances together." The admission that our parents had helped her prepare for the mortgage application was both legally incriminating and morally revealing about their willingness to assist with financial arrangements they didn't fully understand, rather than asking questions about sudden changes in Danielle's creditworthiness. "Mom, the best thing you can do is cooperate with the investigation and tell the truth about what you knew and when you knew it," I advised with practical guidance about minimizing legal exposure through honesty rather than continued concealment. "But if we tell the truth about helping her, we might go to prison," Thomas said with fear about consequences that seemed disproportionate to their supportive intentions. "Dad, if you lie to federal investigators, you'll definitely face serious charges," I replied with accuracy about how cooperation versus obstruction affects criminal prosecution outcomes. "The only way to minimize your legal problems is to be completely honest about your involvement." 6 months after Danielle's arrest at her housewarming party, she had been sentenced to 3 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution for the financial damage caused by her identity theft, while our parents received probation and community service for their role as accessories to financial fraud. "I never meant for any of this to happen," Danielle wrote in a letter from prison that was part of her court-ordered restitution process. "I just wanted to succeed and build the lifestyle I thought I deserved, and I convinced myself that borrowing your credit temporarily wouldn't hurt anyone." The explanation that identity theft was borrowing credit temporarily revealed Danielle's continued inability to understand the severity of her crimes and their impact on my financial future, even after facing criminal prosecution and imprisonment. "I hope someday you can forgive me for the damage I caused to your credit and your trust in family relationships," she continued with what appeared to be genuine remorse for consequences she had never anticipated when planning her fraudulent lifestyle upgrade. The request for forgiveness was both understandable and irrelevant, since forgiveness wouldn't restore my damaged credit or eliminate the years of financial recovery required to rebuild from the destruction her crimes had caused. Meanwhile, I had spent thousands of dollars on legal fees and credit repair services, worked with multiple financial institutions to challenge fraudulent accounts, and begun the lengthy process of restoring my financial reputation from damage that would affect my ability to obtain credit for years to come. "Your case has been resolved in your favor," my attorney informed me after 18 months of legal battles to escape liability for Danielle's fraudulent debt. "You won't be responsible for the mortgage or credit card balances, but the credit damage will take several years to fully repair." The legal victory that eliminated my responsibility for debt I had never incurred was both satisfying and expensive, since the process of proving identity theft and challenging fraudulent accounts had required professional legal and financial assistance that consumed my savings and affected my own financial goals. 2 years after Danielle's arrest, I was finally beginning to see improvement in my credit scores and financial standing, while she remained in prison facing the long-term consequences of choosing criminal fraud over legitimate financial planning and hard work. I learned something important from this experience, I reflected during a conversation with my attorney about the completed case. Some family betrayals are so profound that forgiveness would only enable further harm, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people face the consequences of their choices. The understanding that protecting Danielle from legal consequences would have enabled her to continue committing financial crimes against other victims, was both morally clarifying and emotionally liberating, since it meant that pursuing justice had been the right choice for both personal protection and public safety. If you're reading this and you're dealing with family members who view your financial reputation as their personal resource for funding lifestyle upgrades they can't afford, please know that identity theft by relatives is still identity theft, and family loyalty doesn't extend to covering up crimes that could destroy your financial future. Sometimes the people who betray your trust most completely are the ones who claim to love you, and sometimes the most loving response is to ensure that their crimes have appropriate consequences rather than enabling continued victimization of yourself or others. If this story resonated with your own experiences, please hit that subscribe button and share your experiences in the comments below. Have you ever discovered that family members were using your personal information fraudulently? How did you handle the choice between family loyalty and personal financial protection? Your story might help someone else who's struggling with similar betrayals and criminal behavior from relatives. Thank you for joining me on this journey from identity theft discovery through family confrontation to criminal justice and personal recovery. Remember that your financial reputation belongs to you, and anyone who steals it, even family members, should face the full consequences of their criminal choices rather than being protected by misguided loyalty. See you in our next story here at Her Sweet Revenge.